Lord, the light of your love is shining in the midst of the darkness shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us. Set us free by the truth you now bring us. Shine on me. Shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine. Fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze. Set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light.
Good morning and welcome to Let the Bible Speak. My name is Alex Meredith. I'm the minister for the Marquette Church of Christ. I want to thank Dave Grant from the Escanaba Church for helping me out on the program for a little bit. I'll be here for the next little while, probably at least through the winter for the time being, and I want to welcome you to the show today. Today I want to talk to you about the upcoming holiday of Christmas. Now, a long time ago, before the days of Jesus even, you had people like the Norse who lived in Scandinavia. Like many of their other northern European neighbors, they celebrated the arrival of the winter solstice and the return of longer days, the return of the sun, you might say. The celebration they conducted, they called Yule. You might recognize that term as being associated with even Christmas today. But Yule celebration dates way back when. And during this period, during this celebration, they would cut down a big tree, have this big log from this large tree, and they would burn it. And however long the Yule log would burn, they would feast for that many days. And typically it took about 12 days. Might sound familiar. Now, around the time of Jesus, in ancient Rome, for instance, the winters weren't necessarily as harsh there as it was in Scandinavia. But there are still a number of celebrations surrounding and around the time of the winter solstice. The return of longer days, the light being out longer, the sun being out longer, is a really powerful symbol, especially if you were part of a culture that saw the sun as this divine entity, this divine being, or a divine symbol, which the Romans certainly did. On December 23rd, that typically was a date that marked the beginning of a celebration known as Saturnalia, which was a month-long celebration in honor of the so-called god Saturn, who is the god of agriculture. This was during a month when food and drink were abundant because the harvest months had just finished and, well, they had plenty typically, and so they feasted and drank as much as they could. And really, it was a time full of pleasure, indulgence, and immorality. They often, during this period, would often decorate their homes and the local temples with evergreen branches as a symbol of life and prosperity during times of difficulty, like in the winter. Then you have like the birth of Mithra, the so-called infant god or the god of the unconquerable sun. The birth of Mithra was celebrated on December 25th. This was considered by many people in ancient Rome to be the most holy and sacred day of the year. Then Nero, in 59 AD, established a celebration of what's called Juvenalia, which is an annual rite of passage celebration that celebrated Roman children's transition into adulthood. Now, this would be accompanied by several theatrical performances, as well as an expectation that the attendance of the celebration, and this was actually more restricted to the upper class, but it was expected that the attendance at the celebration would act as wild, rowdy, and indecent as possible, and in fact it was insulting not to act that way. There's something symbolic there. Now, during the period of early Christianity, following the days of Jesus, Jesus' crucifixion and his resurrection, those were typically celebrated during the time period we normally associate with Easter, and what became known as Easter, around the time of the spring equinox. But as far as formal celebration goes, in the church anyway, that was really about it. There wasn't much else in the way of formal celebration going on in early Christianity, at least not that I found in my research. Now, according to a letter that was written, now this was written long after this supposedly happened, so take of it what you will, but this is a letter written in the 800s about something that had happened back in the 4th century. According to this letter, in 350 AD, Pope Julius I named December 25th as the official date of Jesus' birth and instituted a formal celebration to celebrate that birth. Now, why did he choose December 25th? Well, some people believed that he chose that date based on a desire to be historically correct. There is a letter, or not a letter, there is a commentary. It was actually a commentary on the book of Daniel written by Hippolytus of Rome in the 2nd century in 203 AD, which suggested that that was the date of Jesus' birth. And some say, well, he may have seen that, and it may have been commonly believed that that was historically accurate. Another common idea out there is that this date was chosen in order to Christianize the pagan rituals, or you might say give people something better to celebrate during a time when they could be out doing a bunch of other hedonistic stuff and a bunch of immoral stuff. Give them something more wholesome to focus on and get them away from those festivals. I'm not really sure exactly what happened, but what we see going into the Middle Ages and throughout the Middle Ages is that Christmas was celebrated off and on by different people groups. But over that time period, it became really a holiday less focused on the birth of Christ and more focused on pleasure and self-indulgence. It became almost more of a pagan ritual. Now, during the colonial period in the United States, the Puritans and the Pilgrims were coming over from the English world into the New World, into what would become known as the United States. When they did so, many of them in an attempt to distance themselves from English customs, and frankly what they saw partly as a corruption of the church, they didn't often celebrate things like Christmas. Christmas was canceled, you might say. Now, during the Industrial Revolution, late 1700s into the early 1800s, you had a lot of class conflict that was happening in the U.S. Unemployment was very high, and you had a lot of grown adults getting into a lot of trouble, frankly. You had a lot of children that were forced to work in order to support the family financially because there was a lot of poverty. And so, as a result of all of this, you actually had families beginning to adopt Christmas in an effort almost to unify society across those socioeconomic classes and to unify the family. The family system was really strained during this time period as well. And so they adopted this custom of Christmas once again, and it gave them an opportunity to lavish their children with gifts as much as they could afford anyway without seeming like they were spoiling them. Now, this is important. As this immigrant-filled society, which that was the nature of the early 1800s United States, as this immigrant-filled society began to celebrate Christmas once again, you had all of these different people from all of these different traditions bringing in their own customs into it, right? So you had these different people groups borrowing from their ancestors winter solstice traditions and celebration customs. That's why, I believe, that's why we have the Christmas tree as part of a symbol of the season and celebration even today. In pagan rituals, it was a common decoration. It was a symbol of life and abundance in the face of difficult times. So you have sort of the revival of celebrating Christmas once again. Fast forward to the early 1900s, you have Coca-Cola adopting Thomas Nast's version of Sinterklaas, which was really a modern depiction of St. Nicholas, who is this 3rd century Christian that was famous for selling his possessions and selling his wealth and giving to the poor, and particularly poor children. And so this vision of Santa Claus kind of came to life almost entirely through corporations. It's really quite incredible when you think about it. And since then, Coca-Cola and many other companies and corporations have profited tremendously from the holiday season. Today, it's estimated that the United States will spend about, and get this, $951 billion on Christmas, with $1,000 per family on average on just gifts. So that's not even counting food and decorations and all of that. $1,000 per family on just gifts. I mean, that's really remarkable. No wonder it's stuck around, right? There's money involved. I sound like a bit of a skeptic, but here's the thing. Christmas, for many people, is much less today about celebrating the birth of Jesus. It's really morphed more into a commercial enterprise. I saw a commercial the other day from one of the major phone companies, and they had the line at the end, "'Tis the season to buy the new iPhone 14. And you think, wow, that's what it is now, isn't it? It is primarily a gift-giving and a gift-receiving holiday, especially focused on the latter. Now, as I see it, there are two issues here to deal with. One issue is, you might say, the world taking Christ out of Christmas. It's morphing into something different that's less focused on Christ. Now, believe it or not, I'm not actually all that concerned about that side of things. I remember Jesus saying, don't be surprised if the world hates you. It hated me first, right? It's no surprise that the world wants to distance itself from Jesus. That's always been the case to some extent. And not to mention that the proposition that Christians must celebrate the birth of Jesus on December 25th, it's nefarious at best, right? The history is messy. The biblical evidence for it is pretty scant. I mean, you have the shepherds and the angels celebrating Jesus' birth, but there's really nothing passed down to the early Christians by way of direct instruction or early church tradition that suggests that's what we need to do today. We can celebrate Jesus whenever we want to without the world's permission, right? So that's one issue. The second issue, though, is what I would consider to be the commercialization of Christmas. It's contributing, this focus on the material and what you get and the stuff that you buy. All of it is contributing to a very materialistic and possession-based society. It's contributing to a society that's already struggling with those things, and it's almost amplifying those things even more, right? So I have two important biblical reminders today that I would like to share with you in light of all of that. The first reminder is this, and it's in the form of a quote. It is more blessed to give than to receive. The full verse, Paul in Acts chapter 20, verse 35, Paul is quoting Jesus in reference to the poor people within Ephesus as he speaks with the Ephesian elders. He says, "In all things I have shown you that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, 'It is more blessed to give than to receive.'" So the man, the woman, anyone who is focused on what he or she will receive in life, I really do believe that inevitably they're going to be disappointed, right? There's a certain dissatisfaction in materialism. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 10 and 11, I want to read this to you, and a couple other passages also. "And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. And this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity, and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. You had presumably Solomon, who's likely the writer of Ecclesiastes. He had everything, right? And at the end of it all, he worked for it in order that he might have pleasure, and then he experienced the pleasure, and he's dissatisfied. Ecclesiastes 5:11, when goods increase, what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes, right? What's it good for? Fine, you have a good time, what then, right? And then I want to read to you from Luke 12, starting in verse 15. This is a parable of the rich fool. Jesus speaking here, he says, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And he told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. What you receive in life is not nearly as important as what you give. I got the opportunity to went to Nagani High School a few weeks ago to see their production of Scrooge. Had a couple of members with the church who were part of the play there, and it was fascinating. You know, the story, of course, is based off of The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And if you're not familiar, the whole story is about this man, Ebenezer Scrooge, who's the main character there. And he's a miser, right? He wants as much money as he can get. He doesn't want to give any of it away, and he works hard for his money, and he's going to keep it, right? It's his. And it comes around time for Christmas, and you have a bunch of people asking, well, can you give to this cause? Can you give to this cause? No. He's not having any of it. And then, long story short, you have these ghosts that are taking him to look at his past, and then look at his present and the circumstances around him that he can't really see, and then he looks into his future. If he keeps on going on his same path, he gets to see what his future is like, in which case he sees his death being celebrated, right? Now, the message here, I think, is that if you allow the pain of the past to make you bitter, resentful, and greedy in the present, your future is going to be bleak. It's going to be fruitless, right? You're going to have everything, but you will have alienated everything and everybody around you, right? And then the question is, all right, well, what now? Fine, you got everything there was possibly to get. Congratulations. What do you do with it now? What's the point? What's the purpose? Because at the end of all things, you're fine, you have wealth, and then you're dead. It's sort of a harsh message. It's a warning, right? I think about Mark chapter 8, verses 35 and 36. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. And then this is the key here. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? Your life is not defined by what you get. It's defined by what you give. Years ago, May 20th in the year 2000, John Piper, you may be familiar with him, very well-known preacher. We don't agree on everything, but this was a powerful sermon. He delivered this sermon, famously known as the Seashell Sermon, on May 20th, the year 2000, in the city of Memphis, and he was speaking to about 40,000 college students outside there in the city of Memphis. I want to read to you a little excerpt from it because I think it's just so applicable to what we're talking about. And again, these aren't my words. These are the words of John Piper from a sermon he gave back in the year 2000. So listen to this. 3 weeks ago, we got news at our church that Ruby Eliason and Laura Edwards were killed in Cameroon. Ruby Eliason, over 80, single all her life, a nurse, poured out her life for one thing, to make Jesus Christ known among the sick and the poor in the hardest and most unreached places. Laura Edwards, a medical doctor in the Twin Cities and in her retirement, partnering up with Ruby, also pushing 80, and going from village to village in Cameroon. The brakes give way, over the cliff they go, and they're dead. Instantly. Excuse me. And I asked my people, is this a tragedy? 2 women in their 80s almost, a whole life devoted to one idea, Jesus Christ magnified among the poor and the sick in the hardest places. And 20 years after most of their American counterparts have begun to throw their lives away on trivialities in Florida and New Mexico, they fly into eternity with death in a moment. Is this a tragedy? I asked. It is not a tragedy. I'll read you what a tragedy is. I've got a little article here from Reader's Digest. Bob and Penny took early retirement from their jobs in the Northeast 5 years ago when he was 59 and she was 51. Now they live in Punta Gorda, Florida, where they cruise on their 30-foot trawler, play softball, and collect shells. That's a tragedy. That's a tragedy. And there are people in this country that are spending billions of dollars to get you to buy it. And I get 40 minutes, or in my case, 26, to plead with you. Don't buy it. With all of my heart, I plead with you, don't buy that dream. The American dream, a nice house, a nice car, a nice job, a nice family, a nice retirement, collecting shells as the last chapter before you stand before the Creator of the universe to give an account for what you did. Here it is, Lord, my shell collection. Look, Lord, my shell collection. And I've got a good swing. And look at my boat, Lord. Look at my boat, God. Well, not for Ruby and not for Laura. Don't waste your life. Don't waste it. What a powerful remark that is. You may not agree with Piper's assessment of retirement there, but I don't think you can deny that there's at least some truth there, which is, of course, that what you receive in life, what you get out of life, won't matter much at the pearly gates. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 7. We brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. So make sure you're storing up treasure in the right place. Of course, most, if not all of us, even if we're not focused on what we will receive, we will receive things. And we can enjoy those thankfully, I think. 1 Timothy 6:8, if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. James 1:17, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above. See, it's not the receiving stuff that's the problem. It's the desire for more. It's yearning after the things that we don't have that's problematic. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. Listen to this. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. And that leads me to the second reminder here this holiday season. The solution to greed is to give thanks for what we have instead of chasing after what you don't. Hebrews 13:5, keep your life free from love of money and be content with what you have. So you have these juxtaposed ideas of greed and then contentment. Contentment is a solution to greed, being thankful for what you already have. Philippians 4:11 and 12, I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. 1 Timothy 6:6, godliness with contentment is great gain. The key here, the key to greed, Paul's secret, contentment, thankfulness, contentment, the Greek word autarkes. It's this idea that you look at what you already have and you realize that it's sufficient. And that's true. No matter how poor or rich you are, you may not have everything you want, but God has given you enough. He's given all of us enough. And probably, for many of us, a little bit more. Psalm 23:5, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. I think that's the case for a lot of us. So this Christmas, give what you can and be thankful for what you've got. God has given us good reason to give, and He's given us good reason to be thankful, right? Because He's given so much to us. So we have good motivation. And God has given each of us not only material blessing, He's given us Jesus. He's given us the opportunity for forgiveness, the hope of eternal life, right? And I'll say this, if you want to learn more about what God has given us, if you want to learn more about Jesus, treat us as an open resource to you. We want to make sure we extend that invitation out to you and make sure that you know that we're available to you. If you'd like to arrange a personal one-on-one Bible study, we can do that with you. Of course, that will be easier if you happen to be in the area. Even if you're not, we have resources to be able to help you get invested and involved in studying the Bible. I want to show you our workbook program. This is called the Masters Series. It's published by World Bible School. It's a way to get you introduced to the Bible and kind of walk you through the basics. If you don't have a Bible, let us know. We can send one to you totally free of charge. We have hardcover ESV Bibles. It's the same translation we use here on the show. If you would like any of that, would like to participate, the contact info is there on the screen. You could reach us by mail at P.O. Box 372 in Marquette, Michigan, 49855. You can also contact us through letthebiblespeak.net. A quick note on that, if you're sending us a message, make sure you're logged in or make sure you leave us your address. You can also listen on Let the Bible Speak UP on Podbean and Spotify. Thank you so much for joining us today. May God bless you. Have a wonderful week.
Glory blaze, Spirit blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be